We all know that AAA games have immense budgets and therefore able to pay tons of attention to details smaller studios can't. Or can they? Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, 20 AA games that blew us away. Starting off at number 20, it's Greedfall. This is an interesting take on sort of new world, old world. Are you with the native people? Are you with the colonizers? I mean, in this case, you're kind of fantasy pirates colonizing some elven island. This game does a lot to explore every side of this coin and gives you the opportunity to make the choices as to what happens. You can side with them, you can side with your pirate friends, and it's a really interesting, actually deep dive into this type of a dynamic in a totally different environment. In some ways, it comes off like Dragon Age or Mass Effect, and in others, it doesn't come off as either of these things because the world it creates is pretty unique, actually. There's really only one flaw, and that's the combat, which is not amazing. It's good, serviceable, and doesn't detract from the fact that you should play this game if it sounds interesting to you, but it's basically the only real flaw. Other than that, Greedfall is a phenomenal game, probably the best one from developer Spiders yet, who's always willing to take risks, but this time more of them paid off than usual. At number 19, it is Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, a kind of short game that really takes the time that it has with you and maximizes it. It's a little linear, as most AA games tend to be, but the story it tells is incredibly interesting. Not only does the main character have various afflictions you pretty much never see in video games, and therefore has some mechanics based around mental health that you rarely see taken seriously in an action game. And while it's not totally an action game, it's a game where I particularly enjoy the combat sequences, but on top of that, the story it tells and the puzzles it throws at you, coupled with this amazing world they crafted. Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice is really above and beyond a ton of AA titles. At number 18 is Vampyr. Now this is a totally different entry for developer Dotnot, who you probably know from Life is Strange. Now, while that is a good adventure series that tells complicated stories in a sort of supernatural world, Vampyr is a much more detailed game that lets you delve into a sort of plague-riddled world where you're a doctor who's afflicted with vampirism. You have to make decisions as to who to save that affects the world around you, affects people's fear, affects how they react to stuff. Minor characters give you less XP than major characters, but feeding on major characters has a much bigger effect. It's just a really interesting game where the story can wind around and your actions actually feel like they have an effect. It's also an indie game that manages to have some pretty smooth combat. It has its quirks, but Vampyr is a good one. And number 17 is Mortal Shell, which is kind of a shorter, very pretty, but very strange and interesting take on Dark Souls. Now, there is a number of things it does completely different. First off, you're not stuck to a class in terms of your character at all. Second off, there's some notable differences in combat, particularly in parrying, and these things overall affect not just the feel of the game, but character progression itself. In terms of world, obviously it's a shorter game than Dark Souls, but they really do give you your bang for your buck, as it is a beautifully rendered, incredible looking game that I do hope becomes a series and we're able to see continual, ongoing growth between entries, because frankly, this is a really good game. The only thing I could perceive as a flaw in it is that it is fairly short. That being said, for the price and the quality, the length is not really a bad trade-off. Mortal Shell is phenomenal. At number 16, it's Firewatch, a narrative game set in the Wyoming wilderness where you play as a guy named Henry who is supposed to make sure that there aren't any fires starting. Your supervisor is somewhat mysterious, named Delilah, and honestly, some of the most interesting stuff about this game is how much it was kind of able to conjure a BioShock feel while being nothing like BioShock. There's no combat. The story feels like a mystery, and it's a big mislead. I won't give any spoilers because the story is also the biggest part of the game. If if you want to play it, I would definitely suggest going in not knowing what's going to happen. But it's a game that uses your own kind of paranoia against you by giving you a character who is dealing with his own paranoia and coming up with theories. And, there are a number of real events that nudge you down certain roads that are just really gripping. It's a really gripping story, and it always feels like you're in control of it despite it being fairly linear. Firewatch is one that I still go back to from time to time. It's a really good game. At number 15 is The Wolf Among Us. Now, this is a game from Telltale Games, actually a prequel to a comic book series by Bill Wellingham called Fables. If you know what Telltale Games does, you know what kind of games these are. They're most certainly that, although they're presented in an extremely different way on account there is a mystical element, fantastical story being told. Most stuff Telltale does deals more along the lines of, zombie apocalypses, Batman, superheroes. They really got known for something very different than this. And that's kind of what's special about it. You live in a world where animals live among humans, but have to have enchantments to appear human because the humans don't know they're there. It's an episodic game, it gives you a lot of content, and there is a sequel coming which will continue the story and continue to serve as a prequel to the Fables comic book series. At number 14 is Stardew Valley. Now, here's a game that takes something that we all kind of knew, the Harvest Moon formula, and applied a lot of interesting mechanics from Minecraft, from Terraria, from Zelda, and didn't overdo it, but really expanded what Harvest Moon, this farming simulator game, could be. And then, of course, it brought in a lot of modern game mechanics, some multiplayer stuff, and really, Stardew Valley is just kind of the king time waster. You can really immerse yourself in the world, despite its very pixelated, very rudimentary appearance. I love Stardew Valley. I can spend tons of time playing it, and do accidentally, still fairly often. At number 13 is Undertale. Now, this was a game that was a huge thing. In a lot of ways, it brought a lot of the ideas we saw from 1990s JRPGs, Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy games, etc., into a really interesting paradigm in which you don't actually have to attack anyone. You don't have to fight anyone. You can befriend them, and some could argue that's the correct way to play the game. Now, it's not. You can really play it however you want. You can be violent, you can be non-violent, but either way, you get a very interesting set of commands and options to do that with in the game's battle system. On top of that, it has a really interesting story that bends time, dimensional travel, etc., and there's a good reason why this is such a popular game. At number 12 is Outerwilds, not to be confused with Outer Worlds. It's this interesting solar system wide mystery where you're hopping through various planets with different environments, different elements, solving puzzles, and trying to get to the bottom of a mystery about who was there before. It's a very handcrafted adventure, like it sells itself that way and it delivers on that. It's very dense with design, if that makes sense. This is a game that's easy to get lost in, and that's exactly what you want with an adventure game that takes place in a very developing solar system. At number 11 is What Remains of Edith Finch, which is this really different horror game. It's one where you're really going through a various number of stories that all take place in the Finch house. The player character brings the journal of Edith Finch back and sort of witnesses from Edith's perspective how every single member of the Finch family, other than a single child, eventually dies. It's obviously a little bit morbid, but it's also really interesting regarding how the story plays out. There's a semi-twist ending to it, but not this ending where you're supposed to be like, oh my god, of course. By the time you get there, you really take a journey with Edith and sort of learn about trying to avoid this curse, and it's a tough one to explain in a short period of time, actually, but it's good. There's a ton of depth, tons of layers, tragedy, but at the same time, it's also like kind of a beautiful game as well. I definitely would recommend it. It's a good adventure game. And number 10 is Soma. This really interesting game comes from the developers of Amnesia, and they don't really aim to make a scarier game than Amnesia here, but rather tell a story, and there is a lot of story to go through. It has to do with consciousness and whether you live or die, transferring consciousness to machines, to hard drives, to other biomass. I mean, it's a really interesting game. It's post-apocalyptic, and it takes a little bit of its inspiration from BioShock in terms of its setting, but it goes way beyond what BioShock is attempting to do in terms of telling its story. It also sort of builds on the monster mechanics from Amnesia. They aren't as scary. Encounters are definitely not terrifying in the way they are in Amnesia, and you can survive dealing with one in a different way, but this is a game that definitely solidifies them as not just like a one series wonder. So at number 9 is Pacify. Now, this is a game where you can tell that it is a budget title. It's not like graphically astounding or anything, but it is a really interesting game. Now, there's not a lot of multiplayer horror games, and this is exactly that. Essentially, you and your friends are paranormal investigators. There's a weird ghost girl in the house you're investigating. Basically, there's a bunch of evil dolls in the house. You have to burn them all to contain the evil girl ghost. There are also Pacify dolls where if you're holding one and she attacks, instead she just turns into a regular girl and kind of wanders around for a little while. The name of the game is Coordination because any one player can only carry one doll at a time. So you're gathering the evil dolls while trying to hold on to the Pacify dolls when the ghost girl's around. It's interesting. There are a few new modes that have been added to the game as well, but this is an interesting multiplayer horror game that, while it is a little bit cheap in terms of presentation, does keep you on your toes and manage some good scares. On top of that, it's fun. At number 8 is Kingdom Come Deliverance, which is kind of a take on the type of game The Witcher is from a totally non-mystical viewpoint. Kingdom Come Deliverance gives you that same kind of world building, story, somewhat dynamic storytelling, while still maintaining a linear story, while grounding it entirely in history and historical accuracy. On top of that, it's tough. I mean, you got pretty good swordplay, and you don't have all of the magical powers that Geralt of Rivia had, so that's what you're dealing with. I love Kingdom Come Deliverance. It's a game that really brings a lot to the table. At number 7 is Divinity Original Sin 2, which is a game that basically is a tour de force from developer Larian. You can do this 4-player drop-in game style, or you can play it by yourself. The point is building a party and bringing it through this fantastic strategy-based, turn-based combat. It's genuinely just completely impossible to explore in depth what Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2, really both of them are, but the second one is really something special. If you like strategy, turn-based RPGs where you can have multiple players, there's pretty much nowhere better to go. At number 6 is Cuphead, which is a side-scrolling platforming shooter with probably the most cool-looking animation of any game, period. Now, this was a game that was completely indie developed for a while and then had a little help along from Microsoft on the condition of temporary exclusivity. That, of course, worked out very well for Microsoft and gave them a little bit of extra money to deal with. Not AAA money, but when you see this game, it's definitely good that they took it because they got to spend the time on it that it really deserved. This is a beautiful game with an intense style and just massive numbers of hand-drawn frames, on top of being hard and incredibly enjoyable. At number 5 is A Plague Tale: Innocence. Now, this is a pretty different game. It's mostly stealth-based and has a story about a kid having a mystical affliction that gives him powers. But really, the lure to this game is the plague mechanics. There are tons of rats, hordes of rats, and that's what you're dealing with pretty much all the time. You're, of course, doing stealth to avoid detection from humans, but a lot of the time what you're doing is attempting to use light to avoid avoid being more or less completely overtaken by rats. And it's very good. Like, it's a really enjoyable mechanic that plays out really well over the course of the full narrative. This is a really cool game, and they're continuing the story with a second one at some point as well. Number 4. The second one out of this series is actually phenomenal, and I think probably more worthy of this list than the first, just because it ramps everything up to 11. Gravity Rush 2, it's this game where it's kind of like you fly around and be a superhero, except for it's not really just you flying, you're actually shifting the direction of gravity just for you, and so you're basically falling everywhere you go. It's really an interesting concept, and it plays out really well. The mechanic itself is enough of a selling point to where the story isn't even that necessary. It's a good story, but really I play this game because the falling mechanic is incredibly cool. And number 3 is Hollow Knight, a side-scrolling, kind of retro-styled action platformer that will at times remind you of Castlevania, and at other times remind you of Mario. This is a game that I've spent a lot of time playing, and Hollow Knight really just comes off very well at all given times. It fully embraces its retro aesthetic, never looks back, gives you a very retro-looking game that of course has a little bit of humor that wasn't there in the more serious games that it draws its inspiration from. That said, all the mechanics really work well. I enjoy the action, I enjoy the platforming, the jumping, and I enjoy the retro aesthetic. Hollow Knight, I mean, you can't go wrong with this game. And number 2 is Hades, this incredibly interesting dungeon crawler, roguelike, from the creators of Bastion, that kind of returns to the type of game the developer is most known for, while also being very different in terms of its structure. It's just a game that does a lot of different things that you don't really expect from an established formula of game, and tells a really intriguing story about reaching the surface, having to beat Hades himself to get there, and also enlisting various allies from Olympia. It's probably their best game, honestly, and that's saying a lot because I really enjoy Bastion. But they've got the mechanics about as tight as they could possibly be. The story is great. Really, if you haven't played Hades, you should. Finally, at number 1, we're doing kind of a joint It Takes Two / A Way Out. They're both from the same developer, Hazelight Studios, and they take a lot of the same concepts. However, they diverge in genre. It Takes Two is a platformer and very different in aesthetic from A Way Out, which is more a action-adventure exploration type narrative game. However, they both really excel in the type of multiplayer they have, which is a mandatory multiplayer split screen that you use to solve puzzles together. These games are extremely original, extremely interesting, and if you got somebody else to play them with, definitely worth your time. Couple of bonus games for you. First, it's Tormented Souls, a kind of Resident Evil, Alone in the Dark styled survival horror game that'll also give you some original Silent Hill vibes. Like, honestly, it's a game that will throw you back to that era, albeit with better graphics. And finally, Teardown, that dynamic voxel game where you can pretty much destroy absolutely everything. I mean, this game is beyond cool in terms of what is possible in it. And that's all for today. Leave us a comment, let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription, so click subscribe. And don't forget to click the notification bell. As always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time, right here on gameranx.